before we begin, we would just like to clarify for POIs. We ask that you guys unmute and just say POI, and we'll decide whether or not to take it. Do you guys prefer that we use like the raise hand function or anything in specific?
That works too.
Okay.
Pretty much for us, it's a little bit hard, right, to tell unless you verbally unmute your mic. So as long as we're doing that and we have time, we're more than happy to do it, whatever works for y'all. So that's
Okay. So unmuting sounds good.
all right. Awesome. Yeah. My name is Shrey Kudva. I'm going to be the first speaker for the affirmative or the government. And if everybody is good to go, cool. Judges seem ready. Opponents ready. Awesome. Let's do it. With that, time may begin now. We affirm the resolution resolved. United States federal government should require firms to offer part-time employees a full-time schedule if the employer requests it. Let's move into some frameworks so we better understand how this resolution interacts. Let's move to the definitions. And all we need to really clarify here is part-time and full-time. First, part-time. One that usually requires a person to work fewer hours per work week than their employer deems full-time employment. There's also a federally guaranteed amount of time that people work in order for them to deem as full-time employment. And we're going to answer that now. And what is full-time employment? That is working 40 hours per week, which qualifies employees as full-time workers. The other thing to note as a direct result of being a full-time worker is that anybody who puts in this hour requirement are entitled to the full compensation package, meaning that they're going to get dental care, they're going to get health care, they're going to get a lot of access to a lot of very good things that will better their lives. The second thing that we need to do in terms of framework is see how we're going to evaluate this round. This is a policy round indicated by the word should in the resolution, meaning that we're going to be passing this plan, telling you why it's on net good, and our opponents are going to tell you why it's on net bad. Meaning that the weighing mechanism for this round is utilitarianism or net benefits, the most amount of good for the most amount of people. With that, let's move to the plan text or what the affirmative in this debate is going to be doing. Our plan text is that the United States federal government should require firms to offer part-time employees a full-time schedule if the employer requests it. To specify, this is still on an availability basis. If someone requests full-time employment, but the staff is at full capacity, that practically means that hours have been allocated for the entirety of the quarter, and it's been allocated such that each person is working something and it's completely filled up, a full-time job cannot be offered. Just to clarify, that practically means that if the entire workforce is at its capacity, you can offer a job, but if it's not and there is availability, these people will have to give them the job that is full-time. With that, let's move into the time frame or the specifics of the plan. The time frame of when we're passing this plan is as soon as possible. The actor is the United States federal government, and the funding is normal ways and means. Are there any questions about the plan?
Yes. So who will determine if the work week, like if the schedule is full, who's going to be the ones to oversee that?
The employer or
Okay.
the manager of the company, whoever the direct supervisor is at that location, or if it's an entity, there's probably a mandated amount of hours or a mandated like work week schedule. Okay. With that, let's move into our sole advantage of bettering the workforce. Let's move into the uniqueness or what is happening right now. First, the United States, especially in the midst of the pandemic, was facing a labor shortage and is still feeling the effects today, where the demand for jobs and employees is higher than the supply of individuals that can take on those jobs. Under this argument, we need to look to the fact that many Americans are working part-time jobs. The specific statistic you're going to want to take in here is that 26.4 million people in America are employed part-time in the United States. The second thing that you're going to want to take note of here is that people want to switch from part-time to full-time. In the midst of such a shortage, millions of Americans want an established full-time work week schedule and are struggling to find it. The main reason for this is because large corporations prefer part-time work as it is better for their business model in terms of cutting labor costs for two key reasons. First, there are tighter work week schedules, meaning that businesses can ensure that there's 100% efficiency and there won't be anybody sitting idle because anybody else can come and pick up a shift. Second, having to pay part-time employees means that big businesses don't have to pay for healthcare and employee benefits, meaning that it's a lot cheaper for them to have a number of part-time workers as opposed to a number of full-time workers because they don't have to front load the cost of anything such as their employee benefits or healthcare benefits.
Point of information.
Pretty big problem. I'm going to answer it at the bottom of my uniqueness.
Okay.
My second uniqueness argument is going to be that part-time work is detrimental to the average employee. There are three arguments under this. First, essentially the question is not whether or not businesses have room to allow for there to be full employment, but rather if it is profitable for them to do so. But this uniquely is bad because it perpetuates a harmful cycle of part-time employment. There are a couple of reasons why part-time employment is not good for the people who with only one stream of income. So under this, we can see that as we mentioned before, millions of part-time workers struggle with not only low pay, but uncertain shifts. And that can change at the last minute, disrupting the rest of their lives. The workers can obviously quit, but they often find the other jobs available to them have the exact similar problems. Second, part-time workers also face hourly wage penalty. They are paid 29.3% less in wages per hour than a worker with the similar demographic and education levels who works full-time. And when this controls for the industry and occupations are added, part-time workers are paid 19.8% less than their full-time counterparts. We can get rid of this by passing the plan. Our third uniqueness argument is that companies can accommodate these changes. Currently, a majority of the workforce, upwards of 70% of the part-time workers, work at mid or big companies. This is really crucial because it means that these companies have the monetary capacity to take on more workers and not cover their insurance. Let's move into the links, or what happens when the plan passes. When the plan passes, you're going to see that part-time employees now have the ability to get to full employment status if they request it. First, this means that there are going to be employees getting health benefits and higher wages, which is morally good because these people are working hard and we should give them this, but it'll also stimulate the economy with more consumer spending. Second, you're going to see the labor shortage in the market is going to be filled up, meaning that the economy will see strides forward, and in doing so, this will make space for more workers. This is a positive feedback loop. What we actually can see here is that when companies take on more workers, they see profits and productivity rise, and they hire more people. It's a good cycle. Lastly, there are fewer people in poverty. Benefits from these companies mean that there are workers that can now get healthcare coverage and employee benefits, and that's really essential because medical costs are so high, and higher wages are going to mean that there's a higher stable job for them, and they will be better off in terms of economic turmoil. Now, let's move to the impacts. These are rather intuitive. First, you're going to see the number of jobs go up, and specifically employment that is full. Full employment jobs are going to be the ones that are going up. 26.4 million Americans can work more and get their health benefits, which is going to be very good for them. Second of all, you're going to see that the economy itself grows. More people are going to be in the workforce, meaning that there's a higher productivity. When there's higher productivity, that means that these companies can produce more and take in more revenue. When these companies have more revenue and more profit, they need more people to come work for them. This is a good cycle in which we're going to see more hiring and more people getting jobs, more consumption, and the growth of the economy altogether. So from what you can tell from this altogether, the main things to take away, there is a labor shortage. We need to close this labor shortage. People in America are working part-time jobs that are not paying them to the fullest of their abilities. Corporations are exploiting them because they know that they can pay them less if they work part-time. Passing this plan is going to help the workers of America. It's going to provide them with the benefits that they deserve, and it's going to help everybody a whole lot. And for all these reasons, we're very proud to affirm. Thank you.
Alrighty. Quick microphone check. Can everybody hear me okay? No static? Sounds good. Okay, so really quick off-time roadmap. I'm going to be going over our case as the negation, and then I'll be going over our opponent's plan, and then running through their contentions. With that in mind, let's start time. Hi, judges. My name's Maddie Christensen, and I'm the first negation speaker on this resolution that the United States federal government should require firms to offer part-time employees a full-time schedule if the employee requests it. So let's quickly go over value for this round. We agree with utilitarianism, greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. We agree with their definition of part-time. And then for full-time, we just want to clarify, our opponent said entitled to a full compensation package. We just want to make sure that everyone here knows that it's entitled to the compensation that the company is offering to these employees. So with that in mind, let's get into our case as the negation. Now, our first contention is that having to offer these employees a full-time position lowers the ability of firms to function. Subpoint A is small businesses. Judges, there are 5.5 million family-owned businesses in the United States. Family-owned businesses contribute 57% of the US's GDP and employ 63% of the workforce. Many of these businesses cannot afford to employ their employees full-time. If a small business is required to give full-time employment to every employee who asks, and yet doesn't have the means to pay for this huge added expense to their business, they're going to suffer. The reason businesses don't keep everyone who wants to be full-time on a full-time basis is because the costs typically outweigh the benefits. The businesses won't be able to function if they hire workers thinking that they're going to be part-time and are forced to make them full-time, and then they can't make up the cost of this huge burden. Our link here is that the businesses will be losing drastic amounts of money in employing more people full-time. They're going to be hiring less workers to make up for this drop in income, meaning less people will even have the option to be employed at businesses around the United States. And the impact of this, judges, is that our economy will suffer. Businesses will hire less people. The businesses themselves will likely experience less profits, which can make them spike their prices of products in an attempt to make up for the increased cost of production. So we would likely see less overall employment across the United States, huge loss of profits for businesses inside the United States, which may lead to outsourcing labor in an attempt to find cheaper means of production, as well as likely spike increases in general goods and products because of the increased cost of labor in producing them. Those impacts, judges, are huge. Now I'm going to be getting into our second contention, what this plan will look like in the real world. Subpoint A is flexibility of scheduling. If you've ever seen the schedule of a business, it's packed. Full-time employees are constantly listed on the schedule, part-time employees are listed here and listed there, and there's almost no room for change. Because if 5 more employees were to go full-time, where would they fit in the schedule? Well, one employee requesting a full-time position can make it so 3 other workers filling in that position part-time get fired. Businesses only have a certain number of spots available for workers and only a certain number of hours to give. So it makes sense that there would be checks and balances. Give one person more hours, you take them away from someone else. It simply isn't fair, it isn't just, and it puts a lot of people out of work. So the impact of this is that one person taking a full-time job could lead to employers having to take away people who voluntarily do the same part-time job. People could lose their jobs, millions of people, as there are 27.7 million part-time workers in the US, or we will use our opponent's number of, I think, 26 million. So subpoint B is the disaster in hiring. Many of the positions that are part-time are meant to be short, specialized jobs that don't need a full-time schedule. When you look up part-time jobs near me, here's what comes up: office assistant part-time, nanny part-time, security officer for venue part-time. None of these jobs are meant to be full-time, but under the Affirmations plan, or under the resolution per se, I'm going to be getting into their plan in a minute, all of them who have requested full schedules, even if the market can't adjust to them, will have to be granted them. So if someone wants to work full-time, they can either apply for a full-time job, or in the status quo, they can request to their employer that they work full-time. If the employer says no, there's a million reasons it could be. And so we cannot just allow this full-time position to be granted to all part-time employees who want it, because it would cause disastrous results on scheduling and on the hiring process of specialization, which leads us into our third contention, which is actually labor specialization. An important topic in economics is labor specialization. It states that an individual becomes economically specialized when they focus their production efforts on an increasingly narrow range of tasks. So a major perk of hiring part-time employees is that they can be trained to specialize in a specific task. This allows them to produce higher quality work than employees that frequently have to rotate positions. And this is especially useful in administrative or manufacturing roles. Now, if the government was to suddenly force these firms to offer these positions full-time if they wanted them, the firm would now be less productive. So the impact of passing this resolution is that specialization would go down, meaning that the quality of goods produced is either A, going to go down because they're they're having to use less specialized workers because now they're having to use full-time employees, which means that they're shifting from task to task with less focus on the specialization. And the result of this, judges, is that the overall production rate in our country, the fact that these companies that were once producing these products are now going to have to shift their entire mindset of specialization, of having certain employees do certain jobs, it's going to lead to disastrous consequences for our economy as our entire manufacturing processes of these companies and administrative offices shift and change. So with this in mind and our impacts in mind for what exactly is going to happen if the US government requires firms to offer part-time employment, part-time employees a full-time schedule, let's get into our opponent's case, which actually leads us into their plan. Now, their plan, judges, really isn't fair. They're saying that full-time positions are still offered on an availability basis, meaning that hours have been allocated, and so if the company says we can't give you hours, then they aren't offered a full-time job. It's only offered if there's availability, and that availability, very important, is determined by the company. So basically, this plan won't work because an employer is truly having a labor shortage. They're going to offer those workers full-time jobs because they need to fill those hours. And if they don't have a labor shortage, they'll just say the schedule is full. This plan doesn't argue what the AF's burden was to argue in this debate. If companies could just say no whenever they wanted because they're the ones determining whether their hours are full, it's basically the status quo. If you want to get rid of exploitation, don't make the exploiters the one who will decide if their schedule is full. So basically, then their entire plan, their entire case, the US in the pandemic was faced with labor shortages. Well, the market's going to fix this labor shortage themselves. Part-time employees could not be afforded to switch up to full-time employment due to labor shortages because the companies are already struggling. And also, judges, if we look at how their plan correlates to their impacts and to the fact that they say employees are going to get higher health benefits, higher wages, companies can accommodate these changes, they can't. And our opponent's plan doesn't even claim their impacts because companies under their plan, judges, can just say no. That is the status quo, essentially. So please don't listen to their impacts.
All right. So I'm Manish Talmati. I'm going to be the second speaker for the affirmative. I'll start on the aff case and I'll just go down it. Then I'll move on to the neg and I'll do weighing if I have time at the end. All right. Is everyone good? All right. My time begins now. Let's start on the affirmative plan. So basically, they make this overarching argument on the availability clause in our plan. They basically say that like availability, like us saying that like employers can only give full-time jobs if they're available means that A, it means that like these companies won't give anything, and that B, it basically means that our plan doesn't work. There's a couple of responses to this. The first thing is the reason why our plan makes sense is pretty simple, right? Obviously, if a company's entire work schedule is full, there is no way for them to guarantee a full-time job. The US government isn't just going to say, oh yeah, if someone wants a job, you have to fire the person that's like already working that job. That's not how it works. If we're talking about what's happening in the status quo, it's exactly the opposite. Basically, what's happening in the status quo, there is a labor shortage. Companies don't have enough employees to cover the amount of hours that they want people to work. But the thing is, even though there are open positions, there's open timings for these people to work, companies are basically thinking, these big companies are like, oh, I can have this person who's maybe working 30 hours a week, work an extra 10 hours, and they can fill up my work schedule. But then I have to pay for their healthcare, which is probably more expensive. So I'd rather just say they can't work full-time and just leave that 10-hour gap open instead of paying for the healthcare. It isn't a question of whether or not these companies can provide this availability, right? The question in the status quo is that for these companies, it's just not profitable for them to give part-time jobs like full-time, like in their eyes, right?
Point of information.
Yeah, I'll take it.
In your example, wouldn't the company just tell them, sorry, our schedule's full. Look, Amanda's working on the schedule at this time, so we can't fill it up because they're the enforcers.
What do you mean? Like, okay, it's a
So in your example, you said that I'm saying, why doesn't the company just say they're full?
So are you just saying that every like company is just gonna lie? I mean, it's like a law, right? Like if
No, it's not a lie because it's not objective, is what I'm saying.
No,
We're passing a plan.
we're passing the plan, which is the federal government requires firms. There's availability right now. There's literally a labor shortage. So if somebody says I want a full-time job, the employer doesn't want to lie to them and then get sued. Like it's a federal law, right? Obviously, if there is literally no space, then the employer can't do anything about it. The employer's not going to go out of their way to lie because that just like they'll just get sued then, right? They can't just make things up that the schedule is full. Like if the schedule isn't full, it isn't full, and then they can get a full-time job. All right. Let's move to our advantage, right? They basically mishandle our entire case. The only argument that they're talking about is whether availability is there. They just say the enforcers are the enforcers, they're going to lie. This is a federal mandate, judges. It's pretty simple, right? People don't violate the law because there's a risk that they're going to get punished. So obviously, if they keep lying to their employees, then they're probably going to get sued by a labor union or by the worker. These companies don't want to do that because they literally have a product, they literally have a profit like motive. So anyway, let's talk about our advantage, right? It's pretty simple. We tell you right now in the status quo, there is a labor shortage. But all of these big businesses, all these big change, Chipotle, all of these places that are known to hire part-time workers, they are thinking that instead of offering these people full-time jobs, even though they have the availability, they would rather offer them part-time jobs because, again, it is more, in their eyes, it's better because then they don't have to pay for the healthcare of these workers. That is exactly why we have a labor shortage right now. These companies just don't want to give any of these people full-time. But what our plan does is it mandates that these companies have to allow these people who want full-time jobs when there's space available to give it to them instead of just saying, oh, like thinking we don't want to pay for their healthcare, like we'll just keep them part-time. We don't need anybody to work those shifts. If there are shifts available, they're going to be forced to allow these people to have a full-time work employment. And this is pretty important for a couple of reasons. In our link chain, we specifically says that it's probably going to be better for the economy because it solves the issue of the labor shortage, but it also means that all of these employees get healthcare benefits. They get a higher wage, and this is good for the economy in the long term. These businesses right now in the status quo, they're thinking in the short term what's best for their product, for their profit. But if you look at it on a broader scale, the larger economy, if people have healthcare now, if they have higher wages, it just means more consumption. It means more production. If they're working these full-time jobs, they can be committed to their jobs. There's more job stability, which overall is better for the economy. And in the long term, it's just better for these businesses because more people can buy their products. Our impacts are pretty simple. First, we say jobs go up. The 26.4 million Americans, if there's space for them, they can now transition to full-time jobs. And as we've told you, our opponents haven't disputed the fact that there is a labor shortage right now. Companies have the space. So our impact is obviously going to materialize. But second, we tell you that the economy grows. Again, they don't contest this. Higher wages means more consumption, more productivity. The economy grows. It's a pretty simple argument. And also, you want to take into account, they don't dispute our warrant where we tell you a majority of part-time workers are working at big businesses, upwards of 70%. Small, and I'll get into this more on their case, small businesses typically don't employ part-time employees. It's mostly these big restaurant chains. With that, let's go to the negation case. Start on their contention one about firm functionality. The first argument that you want to make on this argument of small businesses is that small businesses and family businesses typically hire people within the family, and they are mom and pop stores. They typically get full-time employees. Most small businesses are not getting these employees that even want to switch over to full-time jobs. They're hiring within the family, or they're hiring people they know. But the second thing is that even if you buy their entire argument about small-time businesses, right? Let's just say you buy their argument that small businesses are going to collapse. The key thing that you need to understand, judges, is that most of these part-time workers that our policy is affecting aren't even in these small-time businesses. Again, it's upwards of 70% work in big chains. And these big chains can afford to pay for these people's healthcare. But right now, because nobody is mandating it, they're just thinking that it's better for their profit motive. It's better for their profit motive. So let's go to the links. They say that businesses will lose drastic amounts of money. So we say no, because all these large and mid-sized companies can front this cost. All these companies, Uber, all the companies that are popular for getting part-time workers, they are huge multi-billion-dollar corporations. They can afford to pay full-time employees. It's not the small businesses that are getting affected, rather the big companies. But B, you want to remember the positive feedback loop Shrey talks about. In the long term, it's going to boost the economy overall. We specifically tell you that it solves for the labor shortage, right? Which means hiring more people full-time, boosts productivity of the company so they can probably front the cost if they're now making more money. And the increase for demand means more workers. Let's go to their contention too. They talk about job flexibility, right? This is basically a response to the availability clause that we talk about in our plan, right? It's pretty simple. First, we tell you there's spots available in the economy. They haven't disputed the fact that there is literally a labor shortage in the status quo. But second, the availability clause in our plan makes common sense. The federal government would never force companies to give people full-time jobs if there's no jobs available. That just doesn't make sense, right? And we specifically say if there are ways to work job full-time, it will be offered. Basically, what we're seeing in the status quo is simple, right? We tell you that you need to work 40 hours to be a full-time employee. What some of these companies do is they make their employees work 38 and 39 hours. They'll have the extra hour slot, but they just rather not give it to the person because it's better for them in the short term for their profit. But let's go to their third contention about labor specialization. They say that an individual becomes economic specialized. They talk about part-time employees can be trained to focus on a speciality, but there's no real link between this argument, right? It doesn't really make sense. Full-time employees can also be specialized. In fact, if you look at most of the specialty jobs, those are full-time jobs. Most of the part-time jobs that they're talking about are jobs at restaurants or small-scale jobs that are more labor-intensive. The most specialized jobs, jobs in STEM, those tend to be full-time jobs, right? And full-time jobs can be specialized. A majority of full-time jobs, like working at software companies or any of these companies, those are already pretty specialized. They talk about the quality of goods going down. We say that productivity increases. So let's do a little bit of weighing, right? On the aff side, we tell you that in the long term, the economy goes up. We tell you that productivity goes up. In their world, they talk about the quality of goods going down, but that's only for, even if you buy that, that's only for a short amount of time. We tell you that there's a positive feedback loop, which means that in the long term, the economy goes up and businesses do better. So for all those reasons, I vote a strong affirmation ballot.
All right, is everyone ready? Affirmation ready, judges ready? All right, just as a brief off-time roadmap, I'm going to mainly be talking about their case because I believe this is the biggest voter issue, and then I'm going to go into their actual plan and the impacts. My time will begin on my first word. Judges, if there's one thing I want you to flow in today's round, it's this. The affirmation will not have access to their impacts if they cannot prove their plan works. Because we as the negation believe this is the biggest issue with their plan, with the main thing being who decides if the business is full. Because I heard the affirmation say an interesting saying, if the schedule is full, it's full. But judges, there's no such thing as an objectively full schedule. As I pointed out in my POI, if let's say Amanda's name is on the schedule, right? Does that mean the schedule's full? Is one employee mean your schedule's full? Especially during a time of COVID, where employees are purposely having less people in the workforce because less people are going into business. I do not see a single example where in the affirmations world, someone could like sue their employer and say the schedule is full and win, or where they'd be like, there's room on the schedule, because the employer can just say, listen, it's full to me. Because if I was to put 3 employees in at this time, I would no longer be making a profit. And I'm going to give an analogy here, right? So a labor shortage, right, means someone is not working in this position, right? So they don't have someone to be there. The crux of their argument is that if there really is a labor shortage that they present, if this labor shortage is so bad, these companies will willingly have their part-time employees be full-time employees. Because what they're talking about, they're not talking about part-time employees. They're talking about part-time employees who want a full-time job and aren't offered that full-time job. Because there's also part-time employees who don't want to be in full-time, right? And then there's this case, right? These specific group of people. So now that I've addressed the fact that what it means to be full is entirely subjective, and you can't prove that in court. You absolutely could not win a lawsuit in court here in the affirmations world. So their plan has no solvency. Let me give an example. I work at a toy store. It's a small business. We have 2 to 3 people cycling throughout the schedule. If someone wanted to be in the full-time job and our employer believed it would be beneficial because we're living in a labor shortage, they would hire me full-time. But if they don't hire me full-time, there's a reason that extends to more than just the exploitation arguments that the affirmation are trying to present here. They could also not want me to hire full-time because I'm only good at one thing that wouldn't be productive in the full market, right? We address this in our arguments. It's the argument of specialization. It's a unique disadvantage on the negations plan, that a lot of these positions are specialized. And the affirmation tries to say there's not that many, but that's not a response to the core argument. Right? So let's say that he doesn't hire me full-time and I tell my employer, I want in, the schedule's not full. He's going to go, the schedule is full. And I can't beat him in court because he's going to go, I can only have 2 employees in my like business at one time, because if I have any more, I'm not going to make a profit. Like, how is the affirmation going to work around this? Especially when they mention these big bad businesses who are super exploitative. If you think they're exploitative now, wait until they take your plan and chew it up in court, because you have no objective standard by which you can prove that something is full. And I'd like to point out they're in the trap here, because if the labor shortage is as bad as the affirmation says it is, the employer will grant someone their request to work full time. So that now that I've just addressed their plan here in full absolute, let's look into their points here and their impact. So their first contention is that the US in the pandemic was faced with labor shortage. As I pointed out, what does it mean to have a labor shortage? Does it mean you literally don't have someone working there? Because if so, right, you don't have someone in the cashier part or whatever, you're gonna have someone, you're gonna have to hire someone full time. And I'd like to point out the pandemic shortage, right, is a temporary problem. It's a temporary issue that's going to be alleviated. It's on the upswing. A recent article from Forbes showed a highly positive growth in jobs in 2022. So it's on the upswing. This problem is already being erased. And they talked about how tighter work schedule weeks equals 100% efficiency, but we would actually argue the opposite, because as we pointed out in our thing, this is a basic economic principle. It's labor specialization. If you have 3 people each working one job, they're going to be the most efficient because they don't have the same burnout that a full-time employee has, and they're only working for a short amount of time, so they're dedicated to this one specific area. So when they say that it's going to be more efficient, it's the complete opposite. It's going to be less efficient because now you're having someone who's trying to force themselves into that spot, whether or not you as the employer think it's the best fit for them. And they said that having to pay part-time employees means that businesses don't have to pay for benefits of the workers. And this is pretty much the one true impact, which, as we pointed out, can't even work if their plan, it has way too many loopholes, as I pointed out. The employer has a huge workaround in that it's a subjective thing, and they're going to win in court every single time because they're big businesses who can afford to do that. Your average person can't afford to do that. And they said that right, we're going to have pay part-time employees and businesses won't have to pay for benefits. But one, in the part-time world, what they're ignoring is that people can have businesses. And two, that being a full-time worker doesn't mean you're just going to have incredible businesses immediately. Because even though they have a full compensation package, what does that mean, right? At my toy store, I know a few full-time employees, they have barely any healthcare benefits. So this impact isn't really the same as they try to make it out to be. And they say that part-time work is detrimental to the average employee. This isn't true because people who want to work full-time but can't is a minority. The majority of people who want part-time work pursued those part-time jobs and wanted to work in a part-time. And I'd also like to point out, if there really was a labor shortage, these part-time workers could go work full-time somewhere else. So that's another issue completely on its own right there. So when they say it's detrimental to the average employee, I'd like to point out it's more flexible because you don't have to work the full amount of hours, right? You can work multiple jobs in it. And I'd like to advocate for the opposite, which is that forcibly having full-time work is detrimental to the average employer, right? Because it means that you decided you didn't want that person to work full-time, whether you didn't think they were qualified enough, whether in the multiple examples we provided, like let's say they do cleaning on the weekends. You don't want them to be a full-time cleaner because you don't need your office to be cleaned 40 hours a week. You only need to be cleaned twice a week, which, by the way, in their plan will have to be accepted. If that person wants a full-time job, they're going to have to get their full-time job, which is just another big issue that they're completely ignored. They didn't attack it in our case here. So the third contention is that companies can accommodate these changes, which I don't really buy this argument, because if a company doesn't want to accommodate these changes, they're not going to want to, right? They're not going to do it. They're going to find a loophole to it. And it's just very generalizing, because it's like as we pointed out, there's tons of small businesses, and they try to say that these small businesses don't hire part-time employees, that they hire like family members. No, most small businesses hire teenagers who are part-time employees. So they can't claim any of their impacts. Now let's look at our case here. Firstly is that it lowers the ability of firms to function, right? This will happen whether or not their plan is successful or not. They said that small businesses don't hire part-time employees. They absolutely do. And we talked about how there's 5.5 million family businesses who won't have a choice in this matter. So if someone wants to work full-time, they'll have to. And they said most part-time employees are hired by big companies, with over 70% working for large companies. That still means that 30% don't, right? That's a huge number. And of these 70% that do, as we pointed out, they're never going to win an argument in court because of how subjective a full schedule is, right? 2 people working at a time, maybe that is full. Maybe the company can't do 3. And our impact, right, is that the economy will suffer, that businesses will hire less people, right? This is another point. If their plan does work, they're going to get rid of part-time employees to accommodate these big-time employees, which will exacerbate the unemployment that we're seeing in the world. And as we talked about in our second contention, right, the flexibility of scheduling, they said that the resolution wouldn't make sense if employers were forced to provide full-time jobs. Well, it makes even less sense since you have such a big loophole in your plan. And it's all about checks and balances here. Our subpoint B was the disaster in hiring, which they didn't even respond to, right? Because it's more than just about the money. Sometimes you don't want to hire someone full-time because they aren't qualified. Finally, we have labor specialization. It's going to be less specialized if you make it go. And for all of those reasons, you should vote for the negation. Thank you.
Ready? I have a 4-minute concluding speech for the negation here today. I will begin my time now. So I think a lot of what this debate has come to is our opponent's plan. Our opponents are suggesting that a labor shortage exists because employers don't want to offer employment full time. But judges, if there's a labor shortage in a business and they need people to fill their hours, then they will hire people full time, willingly, in the status quo. If there's a labor shortage, then companies need work, meaning they'll hire workers. Having the ability as a company to deny however many people's requests for full time employment you want because you don't believe there's enough room to fit them into your schedule is completely contrary to their impacts. They say employees will get health benefits and higher wages, stimulate the economy with higher consumer spending, that 26.4 million Americans can work more. But they can't claim these impacts because these companies will simply not hire workers full time if they don't deem it necessary. Your plan says that companies can just say no. They can say, we don't have enough hours for you. Sorry, so you can't claim your impacts because these 26.4 million people won't be getting more work unless, in the status quo, these companies had labor shortages, which means in the status quo, they would already be hiring more workers full time. So let's look at what our plan proves. Most businesses are family owned, and many of these small businesses aren't just hiring full-time workers as our opponents suggest. So we can look at the impacts affecting these smaller businesses, affecting these businesses who don't have the means to provide jobs for the people full-time that might be requesting it. This round, judges, is about checks and balances. We pointed this out in our first speech. It never even got rebutted. Our opponents say it's unreasonable to assume businesses will have to give out full-time employment because the hours don't exist. And the thing is, companies will have to take hours from other laborers to give it to those wanting the full-time positions. One business with 3 part-time employees doing the same job at different times throughout the week will have to keep one full-time if they request it, meaning the other two are out of a job. So, assuming the resolution is being upheld, assuming our opponent's policy plan, even though it doesn't uphold to the resolution because it says employers don't even have to make employees full time if they don't want to, because hours are subjective and it can be changed by the business's mandate, because that's who they've dictated is in charge of this, the companies themselves indicating how many hours they want to give. Let's look at the impacts of the affirmations world if their plans somehow did function properly. Well, the impact of requiring these workers to be full time is that our economy will absolutely suffer. Businesses will hire less people. The businesses themselves will likely experience less profit, which could make them spike their prices of products to make up for the increased price of production. We already went over all these things in my first opening speech. They've had multiple opportunities to rebuttal and they haven't. So we would see likely less overall employment across the US, huge loss of profits for businesses inside the US, which could even lead to outsourcing labor to try and find cheaper means of production, as well as price spikes in general goods and products because of the increased cost of labor in producing them. These impacts are huge, judges, and these are the impacts that will occur if the resolution, per the affirmations burden on the resolution, is satisfied. So the impact, judge, of this is that the fundamental argument of labor specialization would also go down. A major perk of hiring these part-time employees is that they can be trained to specialize in specific tasks, allowing for higher quality work than employees that frequently have to rotate positions. So in their world, employers would have a less efficient marketplace. Also, the impact of job loss. One person taking a full-time job leading to employers having to take away jobs from people who voluntarily do the same job part-time. People would lose their jobs. Millions of people could lose their jobs, as there are, as our opponents suggest, 26 million people who are working part-time. Our opponents aren't upholding the resolution's burden for the affirmation to require firms to offer part-time employees full-time schedules because they're saying, oh, we would only be requiring it when it works for the employee, when it works for the employers, which doesn't uphold this burden. But even if it does, look at our impacts. Look at the impacts of upholding this burden. And please, judges, we ask that you vote for the negation here today.
All right, awesome. All right, can everybody hear me properly? Awesome. So the order of the speech is going to be an overview about how you evaluate this, then like this entire round. Then you're going to go to the affirmative case and then the negative case. I'll be weighing all throughout. Okay, awesome. Okay. Overview AFNEG. Time may begin now. An overview of this round and how you should evaluate it. Every argument that our opponents make on our case is defensive in nature. They keep saying that our plan won't work, or that compensation packages won't be great, or that these employers are not going to offer jobs because there's no way to prove what's objectively full. Here's the issue. None of those things mean offense for them. But on net, the AF still, even if you believe everything that my opponents have said, gets access to some marginal offense, which means that if we wash everything away in this debate and you believe everything that they say, which is defensive in nature, and everything that we say, which is offensive in nature, there is still a marginal benefit to passing our plan. We're going to get into why we're still winning everything, and it is not a marginal impact. It will affect millions of people within America. But even if you believe everything that they say, we're still going to vote for us. That means that the AF still gets access to its impacts, and it's a try or die for the affirmative, meaning that if we attempt to change the status quo, which is inherently bad, we're going to be able to buy all of our arguments. Since we get access to the impacts on our case, we're going to prove that it's inherently better. Let's go to our case. At the top, they make a number of mistakes. First, they say that employers can manipulate the schedule to deny people's requests for work, but this doesn't make any sense. And judges, here's the biggest response to the loophole argument that should end this debate flat out. They have conceded labor unions, the fact that most of these people are going to be working in these big companies, upwards of 70%. Anish makes it very clear that labor unions have the capacity to sue people. They say individual people can't beat these big corporations or companies in court, but here's the problem. They work together in a union, meaning that they together can take down these corporations if they're being denied work, and you can clearly see that there is work available.
I believe this is a new argument.
Yeah, see, this is good actually. I think it proves our point because it is mentioned in the 2AC and it's not responded to in the block. But I can find the specific point at which the argument is made. It is made under our argument on the first uniqueness point about you saying that they will not follow the law. Anisha's response is that labor unions will sue them.
All right, that's taken into consideration.
All right, cool.
You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I said I had 142 on the clock. I'm going to resume that now. Sorry.
Okay.
All right, cool. Time can begin once again now. This proves our point. The fact of the matter is that labor unions are not once mentioned in the block, the last two speeches, meaning that you as the judge already know for a fact that because these labor unions have the capacity to take down these companies if they're being denied work, you can vote right then and there on the fact that our plan will have some benefit to these people that are in the job market. In general, we can also just say that labor unions ensure the companies give more full-time jobs, and this has already happened in the status quo with unions fighting for change for more jobs. They say that it won't hold up in court, but you need to be really skeptical of this argument because they're questioning the efficacy of federally enforcement of the law. They tell you that it's not going to happen or that there are a lot of loopholes, but remember, judges, we're passing a plan. This is still a federally mandated plan, so the efficacy and the probability of our opponent's argument is fundamentally in nature based off of how much the law carries the weight over corporations. I think all of us can agree that the law is something that every single corporation tries to abide by. So this is this argument you should be very skeptical about. Second, let's talk about the labor shortage. They mishandled this argument in every speech. So let's clear this up. First, you want to look back to our evidence in our first speech saying that 70% of these part-time employees work at mid or large-sized companies and firms. Second, these companies are keeping open schedules. We tell you that these companies are making people work for part-time even though there's space available because they don't want to pay for healthcare benefits or benefits in general. Again, all of this defense is very bad in this case because we tell you that we still get access to our impact. But let's consider the real things that our opponents are talking about. The problem with what they are saying is starting on this argument about a labor shortage. Here's the issue. They tell you that they're going to hire people because there's a labor shortage in the India right now. But we've proven to you the reason why they don't want to do that. They don't want to pay for healthcare benefits. That is the reason why that even though that there is a shortage, they're not hiring people right now. But when a federally mandated plan goes into action, they're forced to do so, meaning that they're going to do that. Yeah. Then let's move into this argument about loopholes. We tell you that the labor union calls it back on it. In terms of checks and balances, we tell you that it's balanced on an availability system and also in terms of economic betterment because we tell you that we're going to be giving we have an uncontested loop. We prove to you that when there's a shortage and we're actually passing this plan, you're going to see more hiring, more productivity, more production, and a better economy. With that, let's move to their case. The issues with their case are that altogether, my opponents have missed the mark to begin with. On this argument about flexible functionality, they tell you that these are very small businesses. Here's the problem. First of all, there's still mom and pop stores that are being run, which means that they don't hire outside the family. They say that they hire teenagers. Here's where the weighing is going to come into effect because judges, our opponents have conceded that we're controlling for 70% of the part-time workforce and they're controlling for 30% of the part-time workforce. Our opponents have agreed to you that this is on net benefits and utilitarianism. 70% of the workforce versus 30% of the workforce. You're voting for 70% of the part-time workforce that are directly bettered by passing this plan. That means that we're ahead on their first contention. In terms of flexibility, remember, people still get hired because they're qualified. They tell you that there's no reason to hire or that people could be bad workers. But remember, when spots are available, jobs will be offered and the economy goes up. In terms of less labor specification and specialization, they've conceded the fact that full-time jobs can also be specialized. There's no offense coming out of their case. So let's weigh this debate. In terms of probability, know for a fact that passing our plan is going to make some difference and some people are still going to get jobs. The reason why that is that legal loopholes don't matter insofar as that labor unions can actually still sue these people, meaning that there will be some effect. Millions of people will still be able to get their jobs and will be able to end this labor shortage, improve the economy, which will in effect boost the economy and create more jobs in the future. We have a loop that's going to continue to make the world better, and they're not. For those reasons, we are proud to affirm. Thank you.
Okay, so we will type up our ballots, and when both are in, we'll give our RFPs. Okay, we have our ballot. Okay, I see one team. I see 1.5 teams. Maybe your cameras are just off, but is everybody here? Okay, great. So it is a 2-0 for the op. So I'll just start off since I was the second judge to submit here, and I will explain my reasoning here. So 4 main points for me. Number one, I do agree with that Gov does not have a strong mechanism for enforcement here. I think that employers absolutely will just claim that the schedule is full. I don't know how you prove that in court. Personally, and it's possible, I'm more of like a flay judge, I suppose, right, where I flow. I wasn't a previous debater myself, but I do my best to flow. I did not have labor unions flowed, and certainly not extended until the last speech. And so, but even if so, even if labor unions were brought up, I mean, just because it's a labor union doesn't mean they can prove it any more easily in court that the schedule is not full, right? And yeah, so I feel that's very hard to prove. Second point for me, labor shortage was a strange choice to run for gov. I think if anything, you want a market where there is an abundance of labor and people are getting exploited because of that, right? I fully agree that right now employers are bending over backwards to get more people into their businesses, which includes raising wages, offering full time, giving more benefits. I think that was just a strange, way to run that. If anything, you want to see what happens when there's a labor surplus, which would give you a lot more offense in my mind. Third point, I agree with ops logic that workers get squeezed out if part-time workers can just get full-time. For a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, payroll is a zero-sum game. There's only so many hours and dollars that can go into your labor costs, and if you have to replace one more expensive full-time worker, replacing 3 part-time workers, that's a net loss for the business and probably for those 2 employees that got squeezed out. And fourth, I also agree with the reasoning that some workers need to be part-time because of their skills. They might be a high school kid, right, who just is not qualified to be a full-time worker, but is qualified to work there for 15 hours a week. Giving them full-time access would crush certain industries. I'm thinking like childcare in particular. Sometimes you need a nanny for 15 hours while you're at work a couple of days. And if they can just demand 40 hours, right, like now you have no nanny, and like there's a whole, cycle of issues that would come along with that. So clear up for me, but good round.
Let me just add to that. So I thought this was a good round. I think everybody has really great like speaking demeanor and just really clear like speaking style, which I really appreciate. I think that, this round for me was a little bit difficult to adjudicate because actually mostly because of the weakness of the prime minister model. I think that, when I understand that you're trying to like get rid of some of the potential claims that could come out of the other side, but because of like how you weren't willing to kind of take the strong stance and swallow some of the like downsides that might come with the topic, I think that actually made your advocacy much weaker, because you weren't able to, like, you can't have it like both ways, and then therefore a lot of what you were saying was more shaky because of what they were saying about like how this might be subjective, how this is like difficult to enforce, etc. I was just kind of thinking about what a clear model might look like for you, and maybe something like if an employer wants to hire an additional part-time employee, they have to offer full-time status to all their part-time employees before they do that. I think just something that was just like very clear, like objectively, like you can measure how this employer can do something, would have just made the round a lot clearer. I agree that, the part about the like labor shortage aspect on the op side, they were able to kind of take that argument and say, look, this labor shortage is going to be resolved because through natural economic forces, and we're really kind of looking at other scenarios here. I think on the op side, you guys could have definitely benefited from I don't know, like taking this argument and bringing it to different economic scenarios. Everybody kind of defaulted to this labor shortage scenario, which I guess is what's happening right now. But like, what about in economic recessions? Like, why would we want to have, more part-time workers versus like a couple full-time workers in cases where like the economy isn't doing so well. So I think just being more expansive in terms of like what you're thinking about and that argumentation. So that's ultimately why I went with side op, and feel free to ask me any questions as well.
I have just a general question, if that's okay. It's not really. It's more of like a hypothetical. Would
Yeah.
either of the judges recommend a counter plan? Because I've seen, like, it's been very, like, I don't know if we should run a counter plan in an example like this.
I actually thought about that too. And I think that if you are able to, for example, say something like, some of these things that Prime Minister is saying is good, like, for example, having health benefits, you can say, like, well, you can mandate that under a part time plan. So, for example, every employer has to mandate like health benefits to every single employee or something like that. I think that could have been like a good argument, but I don't know if you necessarily needed to create your own model in order to win the debate.
Yeah, I'd say in this particular round, like your defense was so strong, you didn't need a counter plan. I think that it can work, but for me anyway, just and this is maybe just my style. I feel like counter plan sometimes can shift so far away from like the original topic at hand that it's like you're having an entirely separate debate, and now it's almost like Gov can't win because you've created a counter plan that's perfect, right? And it's and they were limited to the thing that was in the resolution. But that's just my style in general. I've seen it run really well before, but I think in this round you didn't have to.
I think on our end we're good. Thanks for judging, y'all, and best of luck to y'all in the future of the tournament.
Thanks, and thank you, judges. We
everyone.
really appreciate judging.
Yeah,
Have a
thank you.
good
Yeah,
day.
you guys were really strong debaters.
Bye.
Y'all too. Yeah, take care.